I have a basic interactive game here where I can control my player using the keyboard, and when the player, which is this sphere here, interacts with my cube, a score will add 1 point, and when my player interacts with my cylinder, the score minuses a point. At this stage though, when I press play and start to control my sphere, it moves away from the camera, and it makes it very difficult for me then to continue playing and moving about my maze because I lose sight of my player. So in this particular tutorial, we're going to look at different ways that we can control the camera using script, so that the camera can actually follow my player. Now, in previous tutorials, we have actually childed the camera to the player, where we just take the main camera and we drop it onto our player. That means wherever the player goes, the camera goes. Now, that's a really effective way of getting your camera to follow your player if your player remains upright the whole time. So because our sphere is actually rolling, you'll see how my camera actually spins with my sphere. So although it's following the sphere, it's obviously also rotating with the sphere, which could make your user quite sick and isn't useful for playing the game. So in this particular case, childing the main camera to the player is not going to work. So what we can actually do is create a couple of scripts, or choose from a couple of scripts which will actually make our camera follow our player at a bit of an offset distance. So what we would like is to set a particular sort of view of our player. So say, for example, something like this, where we're nice and close to the sphere, and as the sphere moves around, we want our camera to stay here in this position. So in order to do that, we're going to create a follow at offset distance script. So over here in our assets, we're going to right click and choose create C#. And this is a camera controller script. This is a script that's going to actually control our camera. Double click it. And we have a brand new script, checking that our public class camera controller matches the actual name of the C# script so that it works. We're going to come down here into our initialization start function, and we're going to declare a couple of we don't want to be inside our start function. We want to be above our start function, and we're going to declare a couple of variables here. So the first one is a public game object called player. So this is essentially our sphere. And the other one we're going to make is a private vector3 called offset. Now the vector3 is actually a position. So it's a variable of a position. Its name is offset. So these are both have no value at the moment. So inside our initialization start function, we're going to set the value for our offset variable. So we're going to say offset equals transform dot position minus player dot transform position. So essentially what this is saying is whatever our offset is the camera's position minus the player's position. So the distance between those, that should be a dot position. Offset is essentially the distance between those two players, between those two game objects. So in our void update function, we're actually going to say transform dot position equals player dot transform dot position plus offset. So essentially what this one is doing is on our update function, so every single frame we're going to transform the position of whatever of the camera, whatever this script is on, which will be our camera. So transform the position of the camera to equal the player transform position plus the offset. So for wherever that player is, you're going to put the camera there and add this offset that we worked out later. So we're going to add that distance between the camera and the player that we set up at the very start of the game. Hope that makes sense. So the last little thing that we're going to do here is we're actually just going to change this again. So rather than doing the update function, we're going to change this to a late update function. Now, similarly, when we changed update to fixed update earlier, late update is, update would work, but late update just means that it will update this one after it updates your normal update function. It just kind of is a little bit more precise when we're controlling the camera, because in some situations you might have your camera moving sort of slightly before the player if we use the normal update function. So changing it to late update just means that it's going to be a little bit more consistent, and it's going to make sure that your camera is actually following the other game items instead of kind of getting ahead of other game items. So we can now save this script, and if we come back to Unity, we can add that script onto our main camera, and we can see here that I have now in my inspector the script that is controlling my camera. Now that player variable that we created earlier still has not been given a value, so basically we need to do that now in the inspector. So we need to tell it what the player game object is, what we want the camera to follow. So that is, in this case, our sphere, which we've called player. So we can drag that down and drop it into that space. So now when we press play, we should see that the script calculates the distance between our player and the position of my camera where it is right now. And every time my player moves slightly, it will continue to keep a camera at this same distance that it's calculated at the start. So we can see now in our world that when I move my camera, my sphere, my camera does follow it, which makes it a lot easier obviously for gameplay. There are some vulnerabilities still here with this system, so you'll see that when I get to the other side of this wall here, because I have my camera set so low, I do get into a situation where my camera kind of passes through the wall, and depending on where that kind of stops, sometimes I will lose sight of my sphere. So it can be a good idea to just have a bit of a play with your game, test it, and if you need to kind of rearrange the angle of your camera so you can see around obstacles, then you can do that by adjusting the angle here in the scene window, clicking on your main camera, going to game object and selecting align with view. And you can see down in the game window that has actually moved my camera's angle. So when I run the game and the script initializes it, it will work out that new offset distance.